My name is James Rudder. Today we're going to be talking about one of the worst crimes an American can commit, assassinating a United States president. We're going to talk about the events leading up to and after the first assassination on an American president, the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. April 1865. The Civil War has been going on for nearly 4 years, and the Confederate Army is falling apart. John Wilkes Booth, an American actor at the time and member of the Knights of the Golden Circle, a Southern extremist group, had been planning to kidnap President Lincoln and give him to the Confederates. The Confederates would then exchange him for Confederate POWs. Unfortunately for Lincoln, the war coming to an end would cause Booth to take more drastic measures. The Confederate Army falling apart was not enough on its own to push Booth over the edge. It was when listening to Abraham Lincoln talk about African American voting rights that he reportedly made this statement. Booth had made a decision that would end up taking the life of one of the best presidents the United States had ever had. In Booth's original plan, he also aimed to take out the Vice President and Secretary of State. By removing the two people who would succeed Lincoln after his death, Booth hoped to throw the Union's government into disarray and also rally the remaining Confederate troops. In the end, Booth would only be successful with the killing of Lincoln. On April 14, 1865, John Wilkes Booth was visiting Ford's Theater to pick up his mail. While there, he learned from the brother of the theater's owner that the president would be there that night attending a play called Our American Cousin. Booth decided that if he was going to go through with the assassination, this would be the place. At 7 o'clock that evening, John Wilkes Booth met with his co-conspirators for a final time. Lewis Powell was to kill the Secretary of State at his home, and Georgia Atzerodt was to kill the Vice President at the Kirkwood Hotel. They would all make their killings shortly after 10 o'clock and would meet up in Maryland later that night. The Lincolns arrived late to the play that night. They were joined by Henry Rathbone and his fiancée Clara Harris. Holding her husband's hand, Mrs. Lincoln turned to her husband and whispered, "What will Miss Harris think of my hanging on to you so?" President Lincoln responded by saying, "She won't think anything about it." Those would be the last words ever spoken by Abraham Lincoln. It was 10:15 p.m. John Frederick Parker was guarding the presidential box that night at the theater. However, during the play's intermission, he wandered off to a tavern nearby. Had Parker been at his post when Booth came for the president, things may have ended entirely different that night. Being a well-known actor at the time, Booth was never questioned when on his way up to the presidential box. Once Booth got through the first door of the box's entry area, he barricaded the door by placing a stick in front of the swinging inward door. Knowing the play by heart, Booth waited for the funniest moment in the play to take his shot. He hoped that the sound of the audience's laughter would muffle the sound of the gunshot. When the moment in the play came, Booth opened the door. Slowly, he crept forward. And with his gun, he shot the president. After Lincoln had been shot, Henry Rathbone attempted to stop Booth, but Booth drew a knife and stabbed him several times. Booth jumped from the presidential box, falling 12 feet and fracturing his left fibula just above his ankle.
Sic semper tyrannis!
Sic semper tyrannis, thus always the tyrant, was the Virginia state motto that Booth yelled when he landed on stage. He then ran across the stage into the side door where he had a horse waiting for him. After a short struggle with the man holding his horse, he hopped on and headed towards Navy Yard Bridge, where he headed into Maryland. Back at the theater, it was becoming clear that the president wouldn't recover from the night's events. It was decided that Lincoln was in no shape for a bumpy carriage ride back to the White House, which was all the way across town. So instead, he was carried over to a nearby boarding house where he would spend his last hours lying on a bed that wasn't quite long enough for his tall structure. On April 15, 1865, at 7:22 a.m., President Abraham Lincoln of the United States of America died. He was 56 years old. Booth had succeeded in killing one of the greatest leaders in the history of America and the world. As for the other planned assassinations, Powell and Azardot had both failed in their attempts. After shooting the president, Booth had 12 days to live, during which he traveled through Maryland and into Virginia to a farm owned by Richard H. Garrett. He hid in the Garrett's barn, claiming to be an injured Confederate soldier, along with his navigator David Harold. On April 26, 1865, Union troops arrived to arrest Booth and Harold. Harold surrendered, but Booth said he wouldn't be taken alive. The Union troops set fire to the barn, forcing him to run out the back door. Once outside, a Union troop by the name of Boston Corbett shot Booth in the neck. Booth was laid upon the steps of the barn, where he said to the troops, "Tell my mother I die for my country." Booth's dying words were useless, useless. 2 hours after Corbett shot him, John Wilkes Booth died. 8 people were put on trial for conspiring with Booth and being partly responsible for President Lincoln's death. 4 of them were sentenced to death by hanging. Justice was served. When our founding fathers wrote the Declaration of Independence, they stated, "All men are created equally." What most of them meant at the time was, all white men are created equally. Lincoln believed that all men, and I mean all men, were created equally. He believed that everyone deserves freedoms and rights no matter what color you may be. He paid for that belief with his life. I'm James Rudder, and this has been Assassination on the President. Good night.